I still remember the sharp snap of the folder when it closed. The CEO, Marcus Hale, leaned back in his leather chair, twirling a gold pen between his fingers like it was a weapon. The boardroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the city below us. He slid a single sheet across the polished table. "My termination papers." "Ava," he said, my name dripping with mock sympathy. "You'll be forgotten by Monday." His grin was wide, too wide, the kind of grin that wasn't happiness, but cruelty disguised as charm. Some of the executives shifted in their seats. Others smirked. I could feel every eye on me as though waiting for me to break. I didn't. I picked up the pen, signed where the ink arrow pointed, and slid the paper back. My hand didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. "Understood, sir?" Marcus chuckled, pushing the papers into his folder as though he had won something monumental. He thought firing me was the end of my story. What he didn't realize was that it was the end of his. I had been with Hale Systems for 12 years. I started as a junior developer, fresh out of grad school, hungry to prove myself. Back then, Marcus was already CEO, a man who thrived on control, praise, and fear. He had an uncanny ability to make people feel both small and replaceable. But I wasn't like the others. I didn't need applause or titles. What I needed was the work, the challenge of building something secure, something airtight in a world where every company was one breach away from ruin. Over time, I became the architect of our crown jewel, the Helios platform, a $500 million system running logistics, finance, and compliance across dozens of global corporations. It wasn't just code. It was a fortress. And I was the only one who understood every lock, every gate, every encrypted door buried deep in its veins. Of course, Marcus never saw it that way. In his eyes, I was just another employee. Replaceable, disposable. He liked to call people cogs in the machine. What he didn't know was that I had quietly built myself into the keystone holding up his empire. Remove me and the machine would grind to a halt. The day he fired me, I kept my silence. I gathered my things, the small potted plant by my desk, a stack of notebooks filled with sketches and algorithms, and walked out without a single word. But inside something had snapped. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. 12 years of late nights missed. Holidays and sleepless weekends had taught me one truth. Power doesn't belong to the one with the biggest office. Power belongs to the one who understands the foundation, the fine print, the language no one else bothers to learn. And Marcus had just thrown that person away. The weekend was a blur. I spent Saturday at my kitchen table, the termination papers spread out like evidence of a crime. I could still hear Marcus' voice echoing. "You'll be forgotten by Monday." Forgotten? The word tasted bitter because for years I had been invisible, quietly fixing disasters before they ever reached his desk, patching vulnerabilities no one else could see, writing lines of code that kept our clients' data safe and untouchable. He took the credit, the bonuses, the board's applause. I took the silence, but not anymore. I opened my laptop, logged into my private server, and reviewed the architecture of Helios. Every lock, every sequence, every key. My code wasn't just functional. It was alive, layered with encryption that only I could reset. Without me, it would keep running for a short time. But eventually, like a clock without a winding key, it would stop. And when it stopped, the system worth $500 million would be nothing but glass shards. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Marcus's grin burned into my mind. He believed in Monday, in the illusion that my exit would fade into office gossip and corporate silence. He believed he had won. But what he didn't understand was this. I hadn't written Helios for him. I had written it for the people who trusted it, the companies who depended on it. And I had built protections once I never revealed, ones no one but me could navigate. If Marcus thought he could erase me with the signature, he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his career. Monday morning would be his reckoning. At 8:42 a.m., while the office buzzed with its usual energy, Marcus strode into the boardroom with his trademark arrogance. He was set to announce the finalization of a new, multi-million-dollar client contract. Smiles, applause, champagne waiting on ice. But beneath the polished surface, the countdown had already begun. Because somewhere deep inside the veins of Helios, the code I had encrypted, the code Marcus didn't understand and never respected, was winding down. And when it stopped, every number, every system, every client hail systems depended on would stop with it. I sat at a quiet cafe across the street, coffee cooling in my hands, watching the tower windows glitter in the morning sun. Marcus thought I was gone, but I wasn't gone. I was waiting. And by the end of the day, he would never forget my name. Mondays at Hale Systems always started with precision. Coffee cups in hand, executives rushing through the lobby, the hum of keyboards syncing with the rhythm of Helios. That system wasn't just software. It was the bloodstream of the entire company. And then all at once, the heartbeat stopped. At first, it was subtle. A frozen dashboard here, a shipment status that wouldn't refresh there. The kind of hiccup employees brushed aside with a sigh and a quick IT ticket. But the hiccups multiplied. Error. Messages filled screens. Invoices stalled. Payroll functions refused to process. Within the span of an hour, what seemed like a minor bug had turned into a paralysis spreading through every corner of the building. I didn't have to. Guess what was happening? I had built it. Helios wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what I had designed it to do when authorization failed. Without me, the system wasn't just vulnerable. It was locked. And unlike the executives, scrambling behind glass walls, I knew there was no quick fix. From my seat at the cafe across the street, I watched the tower erupt into frantic motion. People darted from office to office. Phones pressed to ears, faces pale. The calm arrogance that had filled the building on Friday was gone. Now it was replaced by panic. The kind that spreads like fire when millions of dollars are on the line. Soon the calls started, pouring in from clients. Entire companies depended on Helios to move shipments, track compliance, and balance their books. Without it, trucks sat idle. Invoices piled up. Payments froze. Threats of lawsuits began to circulate. Partners demanded answers. The building across the street was no longer a fortress of power. It looked like a cracked dam holding back a flood. And Marcus Hale, the man who had waved my termination papers in my face with a grin, was scrambling to plug holes he didn't even understand. I could picture him at the head of the boardroom table, voice sharp, sweat forming at his temples as he barked at his team. He'd be demanding answers from the IT department, from the lawyers, from anyone who looked like they might hold a solution. And every one of them would have to admit the same truth. They couldn't fix it because the system didn't recognize them. It recognized me. The first calls to my phone came quickly. I ignored them. Then came the second wave from assistants, executives. Even Marcus himself. His name flashed across my screen again and again until finally the phone sat in silence. I didn't answer once. Across the street, the storm grew heavier. By midday, the media had caught scent of the disaster. Industry blogs buzzed with speculation. A financial network ran a breaking segment. Cameras zooming in on the Hale Systems logo while analysts dissected the stock price slipping downward. The empire Marcus had built on reputation. And intimidation was cracking in real time. My former colleagues began reaching out, desperate, confused. One of them sent a short message. We're locked out of everything. Marcus looks ready to explode. What happened? I stared at the words before typing back. The system is working exactly as designed. Then I put my phone down. There was nothing more to say. Inside the tower, the panic must have reached a fever pitch. Marcus had always loved control, but this was a storm he couldn't command. He could yell, threaten, or throw money at consultants. But Helios didn't care about titles or power. It cared about the sequence of logic I had written. And without me, Those doors would never open. By the time whispers started leaking beyond the building, the damage was already irreversible. Clients were pulling contracts, board members were on edge, and Marcus' carefully polished image was unraveling. The man who had once looked untouchable now looked small, desperate, and trapped. Finally, a message arrived that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't from Marcus. This time, it was from Richard Clark, the chairman of the board. His words were short, urgent, and formal. "Eva, we need to talk immediately." I sat with the phone in my hand, my reflection staring back from the black screen. Outside, the city went about its business. People rushing past the cafe windows, unaware that a $500 million system was collapsing only steps away. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't invisible. I was the missing piece no one else could replace. Marcus had promised I'd be forgotten. Instead, he had made me unforgettable. I leaned back in my chair, letting the thoughts settle. I had a choice to make. Now, I could answer their calls, walk back into the chaos, and take control of the disaster. Or I could let Marcus choke on the arrogance that had led him here, leaving him with nothing but ruins. Either way, the truth was undeniable. The system was mine, and without me, it would stay silent. And Marcus Hale was about to learn that some people can't be erased with a signature. I stared at Richard Clark's message for a long moment before I answered. I didn't owe Marcus anything, but I did owe the clients whose data and payroll were freezing on screens they trusted. I wrote back one word: where security met, in the lobby, and handed me a visitor badge, the kind that makes you both present and disposable. The elevator ride was quiet. I could see my reflection in the stainless steel. Calm face, steady hands. Inside, the building felt different. Less like a fortress, more like a hospital in crisis. They put me in the largest conference room. The glass walls looked out over a floor that had turned into a war room. Laptops everywhere, tangled cords, whiteboards filled with acronyms that didn't mean anything to the people writing them. When Richard walked in, he didn't posture. He introduced the others, the general counsel, the CFO, the head of infrastructure, and last, Marcus. Jaw tight, eyes red from the kind of stress that can't be concealed by a tailored suit. "Eva," Richard said, taking a seat across from me. "Thank you for coming." Marcus didn't sit. "We need your passcodes and your keys now." I didn't look at him. "You don't need my passcodes. You need my process." The general counsel folded her hands. "We need clarity. Did you intentionally cause this outage?" "No," I said. "Helios is a zero-trust system with a manual authorization window. The window closed after my termination, and your team revoked the only administrator who could reauthorize. It's locking exactly as documented." "Documented where?" Marcus snapped. I slid a printed packet across the table. "In the key management runbook you signed off on last quarter and never read." The first page was the email where I'd asked for a designated deputy and a rotation plan. The second was his one-line reply: "Not a priority." The head of infrastructure scanned the pages, then let out a breath he'd been holding. "She's right. The job requires a live rotation with the hardware token and the key shards stored in the HSM. None of our contractors have that authority." Marcus jabbed a finger at me. "So, she's holding us hostage." I met his eyes. "Number you fired the only person who could turn the lights back on and then change the locks." Silence. Richard leaned forward. "What would it take to restore service?" I had thought about this on the walk from the elevator. Not revenge, not humiliation, just structure. Something this place had been allergic to. First, a temporary consulting agreement with scope, rate, and indemnification. I will work solely to restore client operations. Second, non-retaliation in writing and preserved whistleblower rights. Third, independent audit access to my documentation and a second engineer assigned to shadow and learn. Your bus factor cannot be won again. Fourth, Marcus recuses himself from all remediation decisions. He doesn't speak to me. He doesn't route instructions through me, and he doesn't sign off on technical change. Marcus let out a short laugh. Absolutely not. The general counsel didn't laugh. Those are reasonable. We can paper this quickly. Richard's gaze stayed on me. Anything else? One more thing, I said. A written acknowledgement that I raised risks before my termination. Not for the press, for the record. Richard nodded. Slowly. Agreed. Marcus slapped his palm on the table. You can't reward insubordination. I kept my voice even. You can call it whatever you want. I call it preventing this from happening again. There was a brief clipped huddle without me. I watched through the glass as legal. Typed language and the CFO scrolled numbers. The head of infrastructure stood off to the side, eyes closed as if bargaining with a god he didn't believe in. When Richard came back, the document was ready. The terms were as I'd stated with one addition. I would restore critical services in phases with legal and infrastructure present for every step. I read it line by line, then signed. No champagne, no handshakes. Where's the token? I asked. They led me to the operations room, a former conference space now buzzing like a control tower. Screens showed frozen queues, red alerts, a scatter of errors that would mean very little to most of the people staring at them. Someone had cleared a desk for me. My old workstation had already been wiped. A temporary machine sat waiting, fresh and unfamiliar. Network is segmented. The infrastructure. Lead said, voice low. We kept the core sealed to avoid making it worse. Good. I set my bag down, pulled out my notebook, and opened the laptop. We're not touching production until we verify the integrity checks. I want a read-only snapshot of the ledger, the job, scheduler state, and the key vault metadata. No writes. Then I'll initiate the reauthorization ceremony. Marcus had followed us in, hovering just outside the circle. Just do it, he barked. Every minute costs money. I didn't look up. Step back, Marcus. You're not on the change plan. Richard's voice came from behind him. Marcus, let the team work. A hardware case was placed beside me. Inside was the familiar weight of the token. My token, the one I had used 100 times in maintenance windows. No one remembered. I connected it, entered the first sequence, and waited for the challenge phrase. It appeared, an innocuous line of text that told me that HSM was alive. My hands were steady. The room got very quiet. Before we proceed, I said we're clear on the order. Payroll pipelines first to stop downstream. Damage. Logistics queues next. Reporting last. No vanity dashboards. We prioritize what affects people and contracts. Agreed, the CFO said immediately. I began the ceremony. The process wasn't glamorous. It was checklists and verification, cross-checks, and second. Eyes on every screen. The head of infrastructure read back each step. Legal noted the timestamps, and I advanced one lock at a time. When the system asked for the second shard, I slid the case toward him. Your turn, I said. This doesn't live in one person anymore. He swallowed, performed the steps, and nodded. The HSM light flickered, then held steady. Integrity holds, he said, barely above a whisper. I initiated the key rotation. A progress bar appeared. Slow, methodical, honest. In the glass, I could see Marcus pacing, arms crossed tight against a suit that suddenly fit too snugly. He hated that he wasn't in control. He hated that control didn't matter here. I tapped a final command and waited. If the audit logs had been corrupted, if any of the contractors had tried to brute force their way in, this is where it would show. The line blinked, then returned what I'd hoped to see. No unauthorized writes. Queue unlock on my mark, I said. Standby on payroll. Eyes watched, pens stilled. The hum of the room sharpened into a single point. I took a breath, not for drama, but to steady the part of me that still remembered his grin and the paper I signed. Then I pressed enter. For a second after I pressed enter, nothing happened. Then the room exhaled at once. Payroll. Pipelines flickered from red to amber, then to the color everyone had been waiting for. Green. The console scrolled. Confirmations I knew by heart. Jobular awake. Ledger reconciled. Outbound files staging. Somewhere beyond these walls, paychecks that had been frozen started moving. Again. No one cheered. The relief felt too fragile to touch. Next phase, I said, keeping my voice level. Logistics queues. We roll back the last patch your contractors pushed and rehydrate from the read-only snapshot. No rights until the reconciliation report clears. The head of infrastructure nodded and mirrored my commands. A stubborn error popped on his screen. An orphan dependency I'd warned about months ago. I slid my chair beside him. It's the warehouse adapter. They hard-coded an endpoint to a test tenant. He swallowed. I wrote a tiny fix, pointed the adapter back to the service registry, then made him apply it while legal recorded the change. The error cleared. The queues began to drain, slow at first, then in steady bursts. Behind us, Marcus paced like a caged animal. He'd brought a PR manager at some point. Immaculate suit, tablet in hand, eyes scanning for a narrative. We need a statement, the PR manager whispered toward Marcus, not toward me. We should say a third-party vendor misconfigured. No, I said without turning. You tell the truth. There was a governance failure. Key rotation wasn't maintained. There will be a full incident report with remediation steps and external audit. Marcus bristled. This is not your show. Richard stepped between us with the kind of calm that silences a room. It's not a show at all. It's operations. Do what she says. The system asked for the final confirmation to reopen routing. I leaned back and let the infrastructure lead to. He hesitated, looked at me, then clicked. On the wall, shipment statuses began to refresh. I pictured trucks in real depot, drivers checking tablets, dispatchers restarting their day. It helped to keep the people in mind. Systems are abstractions until someone misses a payment or loses a job. The CFO's phone lit up with messages. He listened, nodded, then looked at me. Payroll cleared at 3 clients. First, confirmations in. His voice wavered on the last word. Good, I said. We're not done. I opened my notebook and drew 3 boxes. After I said, underlining the word. 1. Rotate all secrets and retire the break glass accounts. 2. Designate a deputy and document a live drill. 3. Publish a client F-facing timeline with facts, not spin. Your reputation will survive honesty. It will not survive denial. The general counsel spoke carefully. We'll need your notes for the record. You'll get them, I said. And the non-retaliation letter you sent me earlier gets countersigned. The HR inquiry is rescinded in writing, archived, and attached to the incident record. Her jaw tightened. Then she nodded. Understood. While the room stabilized, my phone buzzed again. A colleague from my old team saw payroll hit. Thank you. Another from a client. Manager. I liked because he never shouted even when things were on fire. We told the plant supervisor's funds are on the way. I stared at that one. I could see the supervisors as clearly as if they were in the room. Hands on hips, radios crackling, doing math in their heads about who would be able to fill gas tanks and who would not. That was why I'd come back. Not for Marcus. The PR manager cleared his throat. We'll draft a line crediting the engineering team. He hovered on the word crediting like it was a gift to hand out. Leave my name out of it, I said. This isn't about a hero. It's about fixing the bus factory you built and the process you ignored. Marcus scoffed. Spare us the lectures. I faced him. You fired the only administrator with the shard and the token, rejected a deputy plan in writing, and treated critical runbooks as optional reading. Lectures aren't your problem. Consequences are. He went quiet. The room heard it. We moved through the checklists until the dashboards were boring again. Boring is the goal. The wall of alarm shrank to a handful of expected warnings. The crisis energy drained out of the floor, replaced by that practical, exhausted silence that follows a long surgery when the monitors level out. People began to sit back in their chairs. A few texted. Family. Someone set a paper cup of water beside my keyboard and whispered, "Thank you." Like it might spook the system if said too loudly. Richard touched my shoulder lightly. "Executive session," he said. "Stay." I closed the laptop and followed him to the boardroom. The glass felt colder than it had earlier. Fewer people now. Richard, General Counsel, CFO, Head of Infrastructure. Marcus slid into a chair, arms folded tight. Richard spoke without theatrics. "We've restored operations. Clients are stabilizing. Now we talk about accountability." He turned to me. "You asked for an acknowledgement that you raised risks before your termination. You'll have it." The inquiry is withdrawn and replaced with a written apology from HR. The General Counsel added, "We're appointing an external firm to run a post-incident review. They'll have full access. You'll have the right to review any statement that mentions your work." I nodded. It was the minimum required, but it mattered. Marcus leaned forward. "We can't put our fate in the hands of one person again. She built a trap." I kept my voice even. "I built failsafes. You call them a trap because you didn't understand them. There's a difference." Richard folded his hands. "We'll address structure, not scapegoats. Effective immediately, you are recused from all decisions related to remediation, Marcus. Legal will coordinate. Infrastructure will implement. Eva will advise as a contractor until we complete knowledge transfer." Marcus stared at him, stunned, the first hint of fear breaking through the frustration. He looked at me like I'd taken something of his when all I'd done was return what he'd thrown away. The meeting ended without a speech. As I gathered my notebook, the head of infrastructure caught my eye. "I'll shadow every step," he said. "We won't let this happen again." "Good," I said. "That's the point." Back in the operations room, the lights had settled into their soft, indifferent rhythm. The HSM case was already sealed and labeled for the vault. I placed my pen on the cleared desk and felt an ache I hadn't allowed earlier. 12 years of carrying something too heavy for too long. Lifted for a moment, but not gone. On my way out, my phone buzzed. With a number I didn't recognize, a reporter. I let it go to voicemail and forwarded it to counsel. I wasn't going to turn an incident into a performance. I'd already lived through one performance, too many. At the elevator, Richard caught up. "We're reconvening the board," he said quietly. "There will be decisions." "I know," I said. He studied my face. "If we ask you to stay longer than remediation." "I'll listen," I said. "But I won't come back to be invisible." "You won't be," he said. The doors opened. I stepped in and watched the floor numbers count down in silent light. The building was steadier now. The people paid, the trucks moving, the truth on paper. Marcus had told me I'd be forgotten by Monday. He was right about one thing. Memory is short in places like this. That's why you write things down, lock them properly, and make sure the next person can turn the lights on without you. That was the message I was leaving behind. And it was only almost finished. The board met 3 days later. By then, Helios was stable, clients were catching up on their backlogs, and the stock price had stopped bleeding. But the damage to Marcus' reputation couldn't be patched with code. The boardroom atmosphere was sharper than any system alarm. Executives avoided his eyes. General Counsel's folder bulged with records. My emails, the ignored warnings, the retaliatory HR inquiry. Richard opened the session with few words. "We're not here to debate facts. We're here to decide leadership." Marcus tried his usual bluster, talking about loyalty, about how no one could have predicted a key rotation issue. But the documents told a different story. Every page was proof of negligence. Every word he spoke only deepened the silence against him. When it was my turn, I didn't make a speech. I simply confirmed the sequence. I raised risks. He dismissed them. I was terminated without transition. I reminded them that Helios hadn't failed. It had protected itself exactly as designed. The failure was leadership. The vote was quick. Marcus was removed as CEO. Effective. Immediately. No ceremony, no applause. Just a man escorted from the glass office that had once been his throne. He glanced at me before leaving, eyes dark, with disbelief, but not anger. He finally understood. Richard turned to me afterward. You've proven more than technical skill. You've proven judgment under pressure. We want you to stay. A permanent role, compliance and system strategy. Reporting directly to the board. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I wanted the title. I didn't, but because it was the first time anyone in that building had acknowledged what I'd always been capable of. I accepted with conditions. Transparency. Documentation. No more invisible architects behind the curtain. Richard agreed without hesitation. That evening, I stood by the same cafe window where I had once watched the chaos unfold. Tower lights glowed steady again, ordinary as ever. People walked in and out, carrying lattes, hurrying to meetings. From the outside, it looked unchanged, but inside everything was different. Marcus had told me I'd be forgotten by Monday. Instead, Monday had marked the beginning of his end and the rewriting of mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter, stronger, like a weight had shifted. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about respect, about refusing to disappear when someone decided you were expendable. The lesson was clear. Power doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who understands the foundation, who reads the fine print, who refuses to be erased. And I would never be invisible again.